Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Sunday to you and happy Black History Month. Many thanks to each and every one of you for not only registering for this event today, but actually taking time out to attend. To those of you that were in attendance for part one of this series on last Sunday, welcome back. To those of you attending for the first time, you are in for a treat. I'm Larvizo Wright, and I serve as president of Urban League Young Professionals of Chattanooga, or commonly referred to as ULYP. We are a volunteer organization under the umbrella of Urban League of Greater Chattanooga. We connect Chattanooga young professionals primarily between the ages of 21 and 45 to promote civic engagement, do networking, conduct professional development activities, as well as community service. If you fit that profile and you want to be involved, then consider joining and fill out our membership app via the link that should be dropping in the chat box within the next 5 to 10 seconds or so. We can always use more hands and minds to put on events like today, as well as do work in the community. Today's event and the final session that will follow on February 28th results from the collaborative efforts between Urban League of Greater Chattanooga and ULYP, as well as our sponsor, the Chattanooga Red Wolves, with whom you'll hear from in a few moments. We'll be spotlighting our local history that we're targeting today. We're also celebrating our culture, and we're also doing this event to acknowledge Chattanooga Black excellence. So this is all about celebrating our wins and lies ahead. Today is part 2 of our 3-part Fireside Chat series. Our primary subject matter focus this afternoon is education. As such, we're highlighting the accomplished and driven Dr. Lanita Davidson. So I'll be asking you to do a few things as we do the conversation. First, I want you to listen intently and cherish this interview session. Secondly, I want you to identify at least one takeaway and share that with somebody who's not on the virtual session today. Thirdly, I want you to feel free to pose appropriate and tactful questions in the chat box that may get asked during a quick Q&A session near the end. Also, look out for little known Black history facts that will be occasionally dropped in the chat box, and be sure to engage others in the chat box as they pop in. Lastly, we will have a few giveaways that will be awarded at the end, so be sure to stay for the entire duration of today's event. You never know, you just might win something. At this time, I want to turn it over to sponsor Sean McDaniels of the Chattanooga Red Wolves for a brief word and to introduce Dr. Davidson. You have the floor.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Larvizo, and thank you to everyone who tuned in this week for the second Urban League Black History Month Fireside Chat. My name is Sean McDaniel. I'm the general manager and president of the Chattanooga Red Wolves Soccer Club. We are a professional soccer team here in the Scenic City. We play our games over at CHI Memorial Hospital Stadium in Eastridge off of I-75 by Exit 1. We're beginning our third year. Our third season starts in a couple of months, and I'm honored to be here and grateful to be a part of the Urban League. We count it a privilege to support the Urban League in its efforts to celebrate and recognize the successes and contributions of African-American trailblazers in our local community. This is important history, and I look forward to learning from our esteemed education trailblazer, Dr. Davidson, today. But before I turn this over to Latrice Bragg, a member of the Urban League Young Professionals core team, I will share some of the bios for Dr. Davidson. Dr. Lanita Davidson is a retired educator and administrator with more than 30 years of service in the field of education. She was the first female principal at Howard High School and one of the highest ranking Black administrators in Hamilton County schools before she retired in 2003. She holds a doctorate in educational leadership and administration from Tennessee State University, an education specialist degree from the University of Alabama, and completed her master's in school administration education from UT Knoxville. After her retirement, she worked as an educational legal consultant and has served the Chattanooga Habitat for Humanity Board, worked with many of her sorority programs, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, among wearing many other hats for continued service in our community. At this time, I will turn over our fireside chat to Ms. Bragg and Dr. Davidson, and thank you again for letting us be a part of this meaningful event.
Thank you for that. Afternoon, everyone. Dr. Davidson, thank you for being here with us today to share your journey and experiences as a longtime public school educator and administrator in our community. Little does Dr. Davidson know, she and I actually were sitting together at an event, and as luck would have it and chance would have it, little did I know I was sitting next to a living legend. I'm honored. We know that your leadership and your commitment, Dr. Davidson, have had a long-lasting impression on the teachers and students as well, and we thank you for that. So with that being said, you were in the field of education for more than 30 years. Why did you decide to get into the field of education, and how did your upbringing shape your career as an educator?
First of all, let me say thank you for inviting me to this program. I'm honored to be a part of this event. Have some bad news for you, though. I did not intend to go into education. With that being said, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Washington, D.C. That's my home. And I grew up at the end, at least we thought the end of the Jim Crow era. And during that era, of course, education was stressed, emphasized daily in most Black families. And my family was no exception. In fact, on any given day, you would hear my mom or my dad say, if you live in this house, you're going to get an education. You're going to get a high school diploma. We would come home from school, my brother and I, and the first thing they would say is, take your clothes off, do your homework. Well, Mom, I don't have any homework. So, well, go back and study what you learned today. Bottom line, my dad, who probably did more to shape why I went into education, was a very frugal man, a man who worked since he was 7 years old delivering papers in Washington. He was always encouraging my brother and me to take the federal civil service exam, and as soon as we finished Dunbar High School, go get your federal job. Well, I neither wanted to work for the federal government, and I did not plan to go into education. My goal was to be a lawyer, and that was because of a high school history teacher of mine, and it really hit me hard when I was sitting in that 11th grade class the day that Kennedy was assassinated, and I knew then I was going to be a lawyer. Well, that was not a bad plan, but my dad said that's not enough. You got to have a plan B. He was the kind of person that said you need a plan A, B, and sometimes C. So he said, well, if you're going to college and you want to be a lawyer, let me make this perfectly clear. I'm not going to pay for law school or graduate school. So you're going to have to get yourself a job after undergrad school. And having said that, he said, get a teaching degree. He said, get a teaching license. Teachers are needed. And I said to myself, well, why are teachers needed? So I did a little bit of homework. And when I came out of undergrad school, there was a huge demand for teachers, huge demand. You could say the Vietnam conflict attributed to that. Russia had sent up that Sputnik in 1957, and the United States had a demand for math, science, and foreign language teachers because the US was really ready to compete for that race to space. And then, of course, being a baby boomer, there were a lot of us born as a result of World War II, and they needed teachers for the classroom. And lastly, we started experiencing more technological improvements in other industries with increased wages relative to teaching wages, and there was no incentive for a lot of men and women to go into teaching when they could make more money outside of teaching. So with those things, there was a great demand for teaching. So I agreed with my dad to get a teaching license, and that's what I did. And I don't regret it. I spent 44 years in education. And I've decided one important thing. In my next life, I will be that lawyer.
Okay. You did mention that your dad had a major influence as well as one of your teachers. Is there anybody else in particular that kind of helped inspire you to kind of go off and further that into teaching?
Not really, because my mom was a federal worker, and she was she was a cryptanalyst for Fort Meade. My grandparents barely got through the third grade. They wanted us to get a high school diploma, but it was mainly my 11th grade history teacher, Miss Brooks, who, by the way, her husband had been my principal in junior high school. My brother and I actually were the first college graduates in my family. There were others that came later, but we were the first. You have to look at the culture in which I grew up in, and that was Washington, D.C. And most of the students at that time, well, when we came out of high school, you went to work for the federal government. I mean, there was government jobs everywhere. All you had to do was pass the civil service exam. It was basically on an 8th grade level, and it paid well, very good benefits. So most of my classmates, if they didn't go in the military, many of them went to college. A lot of them didn't finish. Many of them did. But really, your calling was to work for one of those government agencies in Washington, D.C. So basically, it was my dad. It was really my dad.
Okay. We appreciate that and Ms. Brooks for that. So you started teaching in 1970 in the Chattanooga Public Schools. Can you give us a few examples in your educational journey that were designed to like aid in the integration of public schools? Because at that time, things like the integration was a big deal. Can you give us just a few examples of those along the way?
Let me preface that by saying that, first of all, in 1970, integration was still not accomplished, okay? It was still a thing that was a goal for most school districts across the country. In fact, we had more of what we refer to as segregated neighborhoods by de facto segregation. And that simply means that neighborhoods were segregated by fact and not law. And when you have de facto segregated neighborhoods, the neighborhood schools are going to mirror that neighborhood's ethnicity. So you had Black neighborhoods, you had white neighborhoods, you had other neighborhoods. It just depended where in America you lived. And they were mainly that way because of wealth or economics. But something else was happening also in the late 60s and the 70s, and that was white flight. A lot of the white flight was going to the suburbs where the malls went up, and many minorities would buy those vacated homes. We also had, and we found that that was not the best thing to do. A lot of the urban areas started building those huge public housing. We found out you should never put that many people together who are in the same economic echelon. And of course, many Black families just stay where they are. So their neighborhood schools were predominantly Black. Now, when I came to Chattanooga in 1970, Mr. Mapp, who is my understanding had been president of the NAACP for several years, and he was the only plaintiff in a DSEC case against the Chattanooga Public Schools. And keep in mind, in 1970, you had the Chattanooga Public Schools, which was the city, and you had the Hamilton County Department of Education, which was the county schools. And Mr. Mapp, who would frequently speak before the Chattanooga City Board of Education, not only did he want the schools integrated, but he said, well, let's start with integration of the teachers and the administrators, and then we'll start working on other things in degrees. And of course, many of you may not know, all of this came about in 1954 with Brown versus the Board of Education, and then in 1955 where the Supreme Court said, well, you got to integrate these schools with all deliberate speed. All of it stems back from the Dred Scott case, back to Plessy versus Ferguson. Simply said everything that's separate can't be equal. That's basically what it said. So from the time I was a teacher here in Chattanooga until I left, there were many things implemented to bring about integration. And one of the things that I remember vividly was M&Ms. and not the candy. There were majority to minority transfers. Now you're saying, well, what does that mean? Let me give you a good example. When I was principal of Hardy Junior High, which was located in East Chattanooga, my school, or our school, I hate that word my school because it was not my school. Our school was paired with Hickson Junior High School, which was on the north end of the county. And the principal there could, if a student applied for an M&M, a majority to minority transfer, he or she could accept those students, provided it did not put a burden on their pupil-teacher ratio. So I did lose students from Hardy to Hickson. Ironically, I did not get students from Hickson to Hardy because the white students did not want to come to the black school, but the black students wanted to go to the white schools. Ironically, I also lost my highest test takers out of the Hardy student body to Hickson. That was one of the things tried, and there were a number of schools in the Chattanooga city limits that were paired with schools such as Hardy. Then we had what we call 60-40 transfers. This was to bring about integration with the staff. Now, so what is 60-40? 60-40 simply meant that if a school was predominantly white, then 60% of that staff had to be white and 40% minority. If it was a black school, then 60% of the staff had to be black and 40% white. So we had 60-40 transfers, I know, twice during my tenure with the school system. I think it was 3 times, but you better fact check that. But I do know we had it twice during that time. Then as time moved on, we started implementing magnet schools. That was to create diverse student populations as well as diverse faculties. And of course, some of them are still in existence today, like Arts and Sciences, which is located in the old Riverside High School building, CSLA, City, which started out as a high school, then became School of Performing Arts. One school that probably most people have forgotten about is the Montessori school that was put at Barker. It did not last very long, but we did try the Montessori concept. We also had a school within a school, and that was at Brainerd High School. That was to attract students who were high performing into their School of Academics. You had a School of Academics sitting down inside of a high school. And that was the baby of Dr. Colbert Whitaker, who was the principal then. So we had a number of things. So you had 60-40, you had minority transfers, you had magnet schools, you had schools within a school. And then when Dr. Reynolds came along, who, by the way, was the last superintendent in Chattanooga Public Schools, he did something that had not been tried, and he reconstituted faculties. So you're trying to say, what do you mean? Well, if he decided to reconstitute School A or School B, everybody on that staff, their positions were declared vacant, and you had to reapply for your job. If you did not wish to return to that school, there were other options available to you. Dr. Reynolds probably reconstituted in the neighborhood of about 15 schools, and I definitely remember him reconstituting 11 of them in 1 year. And I remember that vividly because I was working in personnel at that time, and it was a task. And the purpose of reconstituting the schools not only was to make the staffs more diverse, but he also wanted people in schools who had a passion for wanting to be there to teach their students. And at the same time, he alluded to, well, make sure you pick a staff that is diverse, male, female, black, white, people of color, whatever. Just don't make it all of one particular gender or color. And then in 1997, the Chattanooga Public Schools merged with Hamilton County Department of Education. During that time, Dr. Jesse Register redistricted the school zones several times. And I can't remember all of the zones, but I do remember that East Ridge, if I'm not mistaken, was paired up with either, I think, Brainerd, if I'm not mistaken. And I do notice today that East Ridge now today have far more minority students than they've had in the past. So bottom line, integration is, in my opinion, is never going to be 100% until we have integrated neighborhoods across the board. But the school system, both the city and the county, did try a number of things thanks to Mr. Matt. And once again, you had your M&M transfers, you had your teacher 60-40 assignments, you had magnet schools, you had schools within a school. We even had a school without walls at Clifton Hills. Improving, one thing I failed to mention, and that was we had to improve what was called vocational technical education. And one of the things that Dr. Reynolds did was to close Kirkman. Kirkman enrollment had gone down, and Kirkman was a vocational school located in the downtown area of Chattanooga. And because the enrollment had decreased substantially, Kirkman folded into Howard High School in 1991, and I was the principal. And the purpose of Kirkman folding into Howard was to merge the student bodies as well as the faculties, but also with the hopes of attracting the students from East Ridge. East Ridge was a predominantly white area, and also to allow Howard to have all of the unique vocational / technical programs. A vocational wing was built, state-of-the-art equipment was added. However, it did not produce what we wanted. In other words, the students did not come from East Ridge to Howard, even though we had a fantastic vocational technical program.
Okay, so you mentioned that you were the principal at Howard. Some may not know you were the first female principal at Howard. Can you tell us about some of those challenges? Because you were a twofold. You were out of the norm. You were a female, and you were Black in administration. Can you tell us about some of those challenges that you had and some of the goals when you got on board to become principal?
Yeah, it was challenging. And let me tell you the challenges and be very candid and very honest about the challenges. I really didn't know what to expect. I'd been a junior high school principal. I'd been trained to become a middle school principal. I'd spent a year in being a director of schools. But high schools, they're a little different. And what I found at Howard that was truly a challenge was the high student absenteeism and tardiness. There was a high percentage of teen pregnancy, which also attributed to absenteeism. Test scores were low. The ACT, the SATs, and at that time, and students were still taking what was called the Tennessee Proficiency Exam. You had to pass the English and the math to get a regular diploma in the state of Tennessee. Well, a lot of the students had not passed both sections of that proficiency, or what they call the TCAP. I also found a lot of students on roll who had actually aged out of high school, but still on the roll, came to school when they felt like it, or came for lunch and left. And many of them were 18, and I had one student that had half a unit at 18, and if she had stayed in school, she would have been 24 when she graduated. So we had to come up with some ways to try to attract these students to do better, or the programs. Of course, at that time, they could leave the high school setting and go into Chattanooga State in what they call adult high school. Another thing that at Howard that was a challenge was lack of technology. A lot of the high schools were scheduling with computer programs and able to collect the data that we needed so we can make better instructional decisions. So technology was a challenge, and we needed more time with that merger of Kirkman and Howard with the two staffs. There were two diverse schools. One had been a vocational school forever, and now we were now merging academia, straight academia, college prep with vocational and technical, and they've always been that back and forth about vocational. Well, let me tell anybody, vocational is not as easy as people perceive it to be. You cannot build a house without knowing geometry. But we needed more time, and we did not have the time that we needed. So most of the challenge from that just came from the adults, not the students, but rather the adults. But we had some goals. We had to have some goals. And Dr. Reynolds, who was the superintendent for Chattanooga City, was very, very helpful. And I have to give the Howard alumni and the community their kudos too, because first of all, they decided, and it was not my idea, to change the name of the school. And in 1990, Howard was changed from Howard High School to the Howard School of Academics and Technology. Not only did the name change, but the students starting October 1 of 1990 had to wear uniforms. No more tennis shoes. We had a uniform of khaki, maroon, and white, which was basically the school colors. And the purpose of the uniform was to take the focus off of fashion and allow the students to concentrate more on academics. Another goal that I really had to focus on was more focused professional development, especially when you merged Howard with, well, I'm not Kirkman with Howard. We needed more focused professional development. We were able to obtain a guidance counselor for each grade level, because now Chattanooga City had transitioned from junior high schools to middle school. So now you had your 9th graders in the high school. And we didn't want those students to get lost, because when I went to Howard, I found out that the year before, and I'm just going to use this as an example, if you had 100 9th graders coming in, out of those 9th graders, you might have looked at only 50 of them being sophomores. So what was happening? What was happening? Because if you recall, 9th graders were in the junior high school. They were the big guys on the campus. Now, all of a sudden, you moved them out of the junior highs and put them in high schools, and they're a little man on the totem pole. So we had to focus on making sure that they were engaged in that high school environment. So we were able to get a guidance counselor for 9th grade, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And the goal was, if you were the 9th grade counselor, you would follow that group of students until they graduated, so that they would know you and you would know them. And we would not have situations like you get to the 11th grade and you get to the 12th grade and you're taking senior English, you're taking junior English, and you're taking sophomore English. That was much, much too convoluted. So we had to look at things like that. Kids got lost in the hopper. So having a guidance counselor for each grade would familiarize those students with his or her counselor, and that counselor was responsible for those children. And then we were fortunate also enough, and I mentioned earlier that we needed more technology. And I can't remember whether it was IBM or Xerox, one of them put in at Howard a reading lab of 35 computers that were designed for reading and math to help the students with remediation and enrichment. And they staffed it with a full-time teacher, and I'm forever grateful for that gift to Howard. Dr. Reynolds was also gracious enough to give us an assistant principal for each grade level. So we needed that one-on-one with the students, so that we didn't want any more students falling through the crack. And for me, as an administrator, I had to really look more at what was going on in that classroom. So I did more teachers' evaluations with the assistance of central office core supervisors, because in summary, I was an advocate. I'm a strong believer in the effective schools movement, and I still am today. And you're probably saying, well, what's the effective schools movement? Well, basically, if you want an effective school, you got to have high student expectations. You have to have frequent monitoring of student learning and assessment in the classroom. You've got to have a safe and orderly climate. You've got to have a positive home school relationship. We needed more parental involvement. That was also a challenge. We did not have enough parents actively involved at Howard. Of course, you have to have strong leadership shared with the teachers and staff. We had to have a clear, focused, and communicated school vision and mission. And it took us a while to work on it, but we got it done. And we needed to make sure that what was being taught in that classroom lined up with state and national standards. And in doing so, we had to make sure our staff development was focused for the teachers, both the vocational and technical teachers, the academic teachers, and then together. How do you blend that together?
Okay. Since you have spent so much time in education, do you feel that public schools have equitable opportunities today? If so, why or why not?
That's a good question. Actually, that's a short answer. And I say it's a short answer because if you have high performing teachers in front of students, I don't care where they go to school, and you are staffing those schools to open each year without vacancies, where you're not waiting to December to find a math or chemistry or physics teacher. If you have effective leadership, both at the school level and the district level, that includes two-way communication that goes up and communication that comes down. I also think that the central office, which I've been a part of, I think that every major division in that central office must have a strategic plan that addresses 3, 5, 7, and 10-year goals for the students. And you have to assess that. You have to look at your strengths, your weaknesses, and where you want to go with that. I also believe that we've got to have strong local and state officials who advocate for public school, Sometimes they don't. People don't want the taxes increased. I get that. But if you want good schools, you pay for what you get. And I think it's equitable if you have those things. And all students, regardless of where they go to school, have to have strong, high-performing teachers. They have to have effective leadership throughout that school district. Because, you know, too often we hear things like, oh, that's a good school. Why can't we hear that's a good school system? Why is it just 1 or 2 schools? It needs to be, oh, that's a good school system.
Okay, so you said that you know we would like to think that about the school system as opposed to the schools. How important do you think it is for the Black community to be a consistent partner in the education of minority students and active participants in their community from a political stance?
Okay,
we need the whole system. We need all of it. So how?
Okay, that's a 2-pronged question, because you heard me say that oftentimes there's not a lot of parental involvement in the schools, and oftentimes what goes along with that lack of parental involvement is lack of political involvement in their communities. So let me say this: one of the things that I found as an educator, parents too often drop off the radar once their children are out of elementary school, and that's not the time to drop off the radar. You need to follow your child all the way through. I saw more parents as a high school principal or a director the day that high school student was told, oh, you don't have enough units to graduate. Well, that parent should have known long before it's time to almost line them up and march them across the stage. But it's incumbent that parents stay involved beyond the elementary level. And in doing so, we've got to implement, I call them old school activities. And some of the schools still may be doing it, but we have got to involve our parents. We've got to make them feel friendly. Too often parents come to schools and they're not treated where they're welcome. It's their school, it's their children. So we've got to make our schools parent friendly as well. We need to make sure that we have, I'll tell you some of the things I did. Report card pickups. I did not give the report cards to the children. I gave them to the parents. And they would sit down and we would have conferences. You need to know what your child is doing. We don't need to wait till I tell you your child is not being promoted to the next grade. We had conferences during the year. We sent newsletters home. Also, I think one of the things that, and I don't think I tried this, but I thought about it. Why don't we have grade level meetings with parents? Why don't we have meetings just for freshman parents to explain to them what's expected these next 4 years? Why don't we have grade level meetings for sophomore, junior, and of course your senior parents? And we know we've got guidance counselors involved in that process, but we need to bring the parents together in smaller groups. And now with the COVID, there's nothing stopping us from having virtual meetings with parents. And the technology is so sophisticated, there's no reason why a parent does not know what's going on in his or her child's school. And I'm sure now that they've had to really be involved in this virtual education, not only are they ready for that child to get back into school, but I think they have a lot more sympathy towards the schools today. I think the key is parent volunteer programs. Let your parents come out, and we've got to establish those programs where it also, they're flexible enough where a parent doesn't have to take off from work. So we might take some ideas from the arts and sciences where they have parent volunteer hours. But the key is any administrator, whether it's an elementary, middle, or high school, you got to communicate. You cannot not communicate. Now, what about those same Black parents in their communities? Well, the school is a part of their community, but also we've got to do things for our parents. Chattanooga have several wonderful, I don't know what they call, neighborhood centers. And I personally think sometimes they're underutilized. Why, when things open back up, why don't we have programs where we have single parent programs? We can bring our seniors in and have senior programs during the day. They don't always have to be throw a ball out there in the afternoon when the kids got off from school. Yeah, that's great too. They need to run off some of that energy, but we need to involve the adults. And one of the things that I would like for the community centers to do, let's offer some things like census education. We cannot afford to lose census money. And I think I read a few weeks ago that not as many Black members, Black residents complete those census. That's a loss of money. That's a loss of a lot of money if we don't complete it. We need to offer aging in place programs at these centers. We need to talk about community living. We need to talk about medical care. We need to do a lot of things that educate, which also turn into that political aspect. So when you go to the polls, you need to vote for that person who is going to represent you, because you now have an idea of those burning issues that need to be brought to the attention of your community. The good thing about Chattanooga, you have a lot of Black organizations that participate in the schools for various reasons. Everything from Kappa Leagues at the high schools where they're mentoring. You have the female sororities that do workshops and mentoring and scholarships. If you've ever been to the high schools at the end of the year, I sat at Brand High School one year where I saw over $1 million worth of scholarships given. So they're out there, the organizations are out there, but we need the parents to be out there every day, not only in the schools, but also becoming more informed about what it takes to make their community competitive and a better community where people want to knock on the door and move into that community instead of going out to some other community that they may or may not be able to afford. And one more thing, I like to see our school board move their meetings out into the community. They don't have to do it every month, but get out there and see what your constituency look like. You're elected from districts. I get that. You're supposed to represent your district, but you're also representing all the students in the school system. So if I don't know how, as 9 districts, I know that if I was District 1, I want to know what's going on in District 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So how do I do that? Well, let's move some of these meetings out there. Let me go visit some of those principals. I know my principals in my district, but how many of those school board members actually get out there and meet principals in other districts? It's not something you can do every day, but if you're up there for 4 years, by God, you can get out there at some point during that 4-year time period, because everything that comes before them cannot be just indicative of just their little small piece of the world, because we're educating all children and not just the children in their district.
Okay. So, Dr. Davidson, now that you are retired, have you had any thoughts about doing anything else? I know you said that you were an advocate, you're still an advocate. If there was something else you would like to do, if you could do, what would it be? Or do you have a dream job, that retirement, after retirement dream job? What is that if you have one?
Well, it would have been law, but I'm past that. I'd like to go back into the high school and teach government and American history. I feel that I'm not sure what's going on because I haven't been in the schools. I do know I'm glad that Tennessee put civics back in the curriculum. They took it out and they put it back. I think that we have got to have better citizens. They've got to understand this country. They've got to understand the form of government, why it is. And everybody harps on the First and Second Amendment. Okay, I get that. Most people don't even interpret the Second Amendment right, but I'm not going to sit up here and give that history lesson today. So I want to teach government, and I want to teach it in such a way that when students leave, they truly understand what is going on in their country. I want them to understand where we've been, where they are, and where they need to go. Too many students really do not know. They know where they are. They don't have a clue where they've been, where they need to go. So as a result, they cannot connect the dots. And that's both in the history of this country and as well as in studying American government as a independent class. And I would love to teach.
Okay. This is my last question for the afternoon. You said you like it when those kids, they know where they've been, they know where they're going. Do you have any students in mind that you remember teaching that are still around, that you know for sure you've made an impact on, and they're doing the same? You pass that torch and they're doing the same thing and continuing that legacy. Is there any student that comes to mind or students that come to mind?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. I'm thrilled you asked that question. I've got students that, thank you, my students, for putting me on Facebook, because I'm keeping up with each and every one of you. And I'm not tweeting, and I have a reason for that one, and I'm sure most people know, but I have a number of students that I am so proud of, and I can't name them all, but let me give it a try. When I think about law enforcement, I think about Corliss Cooper, who was in internal affairs and a captain with the Chattanooga Police Department. I also think about Derek Stewart, who's married to, I think, a principal now, and he was a sergeant. And then I had some entrepreneurs like Ricardo Morris. I had Ricardo for 3 years at Alton Park, and he went on and got a degree from Yale. So I'm very proud of Ricardo Morris. Michael Mohammed, who has 2 facilities of his own, I understand. He's a fantastic barber. In fact, he's my barber. Renee Ford, who owns her own insurance company, and Charles Jones, who went from being a math teacher to the owner of River City Kikes. Then when I think about those that went into medicine, my cardiologist, I was his principal, and I am proud of Walter Few. I am proud of Michelle Morris, who is a nurse practitioner and who owns City Wellness. Kim Freeman from Alton Park, who's an RN, and Pat McLean, who's in Atlanta, who's a pharmacist. One of the students that stand out, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Connecting Vets. He took it upon himself as a veteran to turn a facility in East Lake into a place where veterans could come and get help with jobs, could bathe, get toiletries, things that they need. And that's Vincent Spann. And Vincent Spann was a student who challenged me every day at Alton Park. Every day Vincent Spann challenged me. But I'm so proud of him and for what he's doing with Connecting Vets. And then when I look at the fine arts, oh my gosh, I think about Lee, we call her Lily, but her name is Lisa Crawford. She's written a book called Voices from the Edge. Dexter Bell, I had him at Hardy. He's a phenomenal musician, and he's teaching music at Howard. and he's a part of the Chattanooga Symphony. See, I know my students. And then I've got my faith-based students like Daryl Smith and Greg Woods. I had them at Eastlake Junior. And Celeste Bates Scaife, phenomenal pianist, a phenomenal. In fact, her daughter is into music. And you young men out there, I'm sure you remember Reggie White. Unfortunately, Reggie passed several years ago. He played football for, I forget the name of that football team here in Tennessee. Is it the Titans? No, it was whatever it was. I don't remember.
It was the Memphis Showboats.
Yeah, that's
Memphis
it.
Showboats.
Showboat. I had Reggie for 3 years, and Reggie would come back and visit me. I had Stanford Strickland, who was phenomenal in basketball, and Charles Morgan, who was phenomenal and went to the University of Miami, who played football. Unfortunately, Charles is under the weather right now, but I could just name a lot of students. But one student comes to mind, and I guess that's when I took them under my wing, and they became my babies. I was at Alton Park one year, and I was a social studies teacher, and I was teaching, I was teaching civics that year. I had a student, her name was Connie Talley, very bright student, and she said, "What is that?" She was pointing to something in the book. And I said, "You don't know what that is?" She said, "No, I don't know what it is." Let me tell you what it was. It was a picture of the Washington Monument. She had not a clue where it was or what it was. It touched my heart in such a way that I said, okay, we're going to Washington. And it was during the time they were celebrating the 200th birthday. I took my kids to Alton Park. I took them everywhere I could in Washington. They touched my heart because I didn't want my students to go out in the world and not having been exposed to things that I took for granted by being from Washington. And when I run into them, many of them remind me of that even today. But I have some students I'm extremely proud of, and I can't even name them all. But these was just a few because I see them on a regular basis. And I'm proud of them. I'm proud of them. In fact, the Cooper family, I had all 5 of them, and I know Mrs. Cooper is extremely proud of her kids. So you can just say, that's why I'd like to go back in the classroom and start all over again with a new bunch of kids.
All right, thank you, Dr. Davidson. We appreciate you for letting us interview you as one of Chattanooga's own Trailblazers, and we thank you for your service, and we don't take it for granted. So we really appreciate you spending time with us today.
So Latrice, we did get, if time will permit, we have room for one question that was submitted. Dr. Davidson talked earlier about when 9th graders merged into the high school. And there was a question that came in around what was the impact to graduation rates for those 9th graders when they merged to high school, given that probably was a major change?
Okay, you were right. There was a change. And then I'm going to have to pull from my experience, but I can't tell you how it ended. When I was at Howard and with my first 9th grade class, believe it or not, I registered that year in 1990, 1,255 freshmen. I'm not sure how many of them graduated, but I am almost certain that you probably lost 2/3 of those students. From what you know, 9th grade starts your accumulation of units towards graduation and your GPA. The thing that I don't think we did very well, and that's why I wanted it in Howard to put the 9th graders down inside of the school. You took 9th graders out of the junior high, you threw them in with older kids, and they were expected to assimilate just like that. And they were the big kids on the block in the junior high setting. So they were lost. They were really lost. And it attributed to failure rates, it attributed to absenteeism, and we needed to really, and that's across the board, it just wasn't Howard, it was across the board. We really needed to pay more attention to those 9th graders. And I'm not talking about those 9th graders who were in magnet schools. I'm talking about those 9th graders who were in the regular comprehensive high school. I wish I knew how many of those 9th graders that I registered in 1990 actually graduated. I would say if it was 1,255, I would say we probably lost 2/3 of them for one reason or another, even if they transfer to another school, we need to do more for our ninth graders in retention to make sure and ensure that they graduate from high school. Basically, that's it. I think, and I'm almost sure, I'm not even know if I think the middle schools are really working the way they should. If middle schools work the way they're supposed to, middle schools are supposed to prepare the eighth graders for the ninth graders. Middle schools are supposed to be a mixture of elementary and secondary. You're to have AAs, a whole lot of things you're supposed to have. So when that eighth grader moves into the high school setting, they're used to certain things. I'm not sure we're doing all of those concepts that Paul George says we need to do. And I don't want to say we're not doing them, because I've not been in a middle school since I've retired. So I don't want to say that the middle school principals are not doing that. I'm just saying we've got to do a better job of preparing the eighth graders for the ninth graders. And once they become ninth graders in the high school, we've really got to pay attention to them to ensure them success. That's why it's important that they have a guidance counselor that can follow them through to the 12th grade and then come back and pick up another group in 4 years.
Thank you, Dr. Davidson, for entertaining that follow-up question. And I really appreciate the historical context you've given us and kind of leading us to where we are present and moving forward. So thank you for those tidbits. At this time, we'll wrap up the Q&A and get Dr. Davidson off the hot seat, if you will.
Oh, I don't mind.
And we'll go to announcing. We'll go to announcing some of the winners for the giveaway we have. We have three giveaways that I want to announce right now. The first one is 4 tickets to Chattanooga Redwoods event, and the winner of those tickets is Carson Lakeisha. We also have a $25 gift card to Herman's, and that one is going to Susie Center. Susie Center, you have won a $25 gift card to Herman's. And then lastly, we have a $25 gift card to Davis Wayne's. And the winner of that one is Rakisha McIntyre. We will make sure that these giveaways are available at the Urban League of Greater Chattanooga office, where you can pick those up this upcoming week, and we can arrange for somebody to meet you outside to pick those up. Again, 4 tickets for Chattanooga Redwoods, Carson Lakeisha, $25 gift card to Herman's, Susie Center, $25 gift card to Davis Wayne, Rakisha McIntyre. At this time, I do want to give out a few kudos and thanks. First, Dr. Davidson, thank you for taking time this afternoon to bless us with your wisdom and sharing of your collective work experience. We appreciate people like you who have been where some of us, a lot of us on the call, are trying to go. So to take time to drop those nuggets, give us some thought-provoking things, we appreciate it. And we just want to give you your flowers while we have it. William at Urban League, I want to thank him for being our tech team today, making sure that things were working as needed. Also, Stephanie, who was helping in that task, and the one who's been coordinating these activities. Stephanie at Urban League has been kind of that person is making sure we have the right people doing the right things at the right time. So we definitely appreciate her. Latrice, thank you for being brave and interviewing and moderating today. Thanks for saying yes when we asked, hey, would you have capacity to do this? So we appreciate you. And then I would be remiss if I didn't call out our CEO at Urban League, Candy Johnson. I don't know if she's still on the call or has anything she wants to say, but I definitely want to thank her for her vision for this event and helping us and supporting us to bring this to fruition. So, Candy, if you do have any remarks, the floor is yours at this time. You're on mute, Candy. I think we may be having some technical difficulties. I see you talking, but I can't hear you, Candy.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
She's pretty.
See, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, I was on my phone and the webinar because I didn't want to miss it in case I had to run out of the room. This was phenomenal, Dr. Davidson. I didn't know you when I called you to learn more about your story, but I was blown away even in that phone call. You know, it's often said that history repeats itself. And some of the things you shared during this call, it's like some of the things we're starting to do those again. Maybe this time they will stick and work. But I really appreciate you, again, sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and for being a trailblazer in this community and not giving up, because I know that you continue to serve our community in many different ways. And you've also given us some ideas, just listening to you, things that we can do at the Urban League for the work that we do to empower African-American communities, other disadvantaged persons to achieve parity, power, and economic self-reliance. So we are just overjoyed to have this series, also to have our Urban League young professionals continue to stay engaged and bringing out young professionals to learn about our Chattanooga history. Larvizo and Latrice and the Urban League staff, thank you so much for all of your hard work on this. And last but not least, I would like to thank the Chattanooga Red Wolves soccer organization for reaching out to us to say, what can we do to help and support not only your organization, but any efforts for Black History Month. So thank you for believing in our mission and staying connected to support our young professionals in the organization. And just thank all of you for being here today. I have truly been blessed by this session. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Larvizo, if you have anything else.
Okay. Thank you, Candy. I appreciate everyone. Please be on the lookout for the part 3 of this series on February 28th. That will be our final part to wrap up this event series. So please tell somebody, be on the lookout. We'll make sure it's posted up on social media. We'll make sure it's on the Urban League website. So be on the lookout for that. I do not have anything else in terms of wrapping us, so I will look to you, Stephanie, to close us out with a visual and the music. Again, Dr. Davidson, thank you so much for blessing us today.
May I say one thing? May I say one thing?
Absolutely. Yes,
oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Latrice asked me something, and it kind of went out of my mind. In addition to my dad, you asked who somewhat influenced me not to go into education, but these were my helpers in education. And I have to say they were all men, because there were not a lot of secondary women in secondary education at the time, and certainly not Black women. There were a lot of Blacks in elementary education. Yes, and I just want to call their names. I could say something about each and every one of them, but I want to say Dr. Clifford Hendricks, I want to say Dr. Jim Houston, I want to say Tom Cannon, I want to say Stu Silverman, Harry Reynolds, and I want to say Dr. Charles Hyder, who almost made me just come out of education and go to law school. All of these men were so supportive in each of their ways to me, and I appreciate them. Many of them are deceased, but they're still appreciative as far as my success as an administrator. Thank you for letting me say that.
Absolutely. You're welcome. You're more than welcome. Thanks, everyone.